again for chatting with us. We're just super excited to dive in and talk about a bunch of just really great topics with you. So as you know, the focus of this series is the many ways into publishing. So what can you tell us about your journey to becoming a published author?
Well, that is a very long story. I wasn't one of those kids that knew that she wanted to be an author from day one. Like I never wrote fan fiction or had a stack of novels sort of, tucked away in a drawer somewhere that I'd written in school or college. I think a lot had to do with the fact that, I loved to read as a kid. My love for reading developed in middle school, but I never read any books with characters, Indian characters or characters that look like me, and not even any children's books written by Indian authors. There were books written by Indian authors, but they were adult books and they were literary fiction. And, that for a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, that just seemed way above my reach. So I never ever considered my love for writing and language to be anything more than just a hobby that I love to read. It was about when I was 23, I think I was working at a magazine publishing house, and I was writing these articles for a lifestyle magazine, where one day I think I was about nearly 2 years into the job, and I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I can't write about things that my editor keeps asking me to write about, and like 50 must-haves for spring. Not to say that that isn't a good things to write about. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. So out of pure, I would say, frustration and still not really figuring out what that meant. Like I clearly had that desire to write, but I still didn't get that go write a book. But anyway, I was like fueled with this sort of frustration and just I wanted to write and didn't know what I wanted to write. So one Saturday morning, I powered up my computer and I was like, I'm just gonna write about whatever I feel like intuitively comes to me. And I wrote 2 paragraphs. And that, I felt so free when I wrote that, and I felt so fulfilled in that moment. And I was like, this is what I need to do. And amazingly so, those 2 paragraphs that I wrote exist in the book today. They're vastly edited and revised, and but they formed the kernel of the plot. I expanded that idea into the story that it is today. So that's kind of how I got into it. So it was, I was older than a lot of other writers that started writing. So I was about 23, and then it took me 10 years to finish writing this book. I would say a lot of life happened. Also, wasn't probably the most disciplined person, juggling jobs. I got married and I had a kid and all of these things. By November, I believe 2017, I was ready with my manuscript, and I had come to the US 2 years prior to that. I had worked on, I had done my master's in creative writing, so I was in the States, and I started querying November 2017. And my manuscript at the time was about 91,000 words long, which is 20,000 words too long for middle grade, but I didn't know any better. This was my first foray into the world of publishing. And so anyway, I began my querying process. I had very good responses, I should say. Most of my queries turned into full manuscript requests. And then, one by one, the rejections started coming. By the end of the querying process, which was probably about 7 to 8 months in, the resounding feedback was that it was just really long, which affected pacing. And it was, again, just too long for a debut novel also for middle grade. So I had 7 revise and resubmit requests, which I took as, a very positive note, although it was a very daunting aspect to sort of cut down 20,000 words. I had a whole POV in there from Rohan's point of view, the character in the book, that I had to take off. Plus I had just given birth. It was not fun, but, powered through the whole thing. And I think it was February 2019 when I was like, okay, I'm ready to requery again. I resent it to the 7 R&Rs that I had received. And then I started getting my rejections again. It was all kinds of things from, we really liked the book, but to suggesting that, it wasn't there yet, but they didn't know what else I could do to make it better. And then I also received some feedback where now looking back, I am quite aghast by it. But at the time I was, I took it in stride, and it did affect my confidence a lot. So I had some of the agents tell me that they needed the book to be more Indian, in the sense that they wanted Rhea to spend, have her spend more time at her house, and so that the readers get a more, insightful look into her life there. And because she lives, she comes from a poor family, she lives in this village in Darjeeling, her mother works at the tea estate. And I see that that's interesting, but for the story, like, her brother has gone missing, so she needs to go find him and not just hang out, and just so that the readers can see more of that life. On the other hand, I had an agent tell me that she wanted the magical land of Astranthia to be written with an Indian perspective. So she wanted that to be an Indian inspired land. That essentially meant rewriting the whole book. And I was really devastated. And so there was that. I had an agent that told me that she loved the book, but she had just signed on another author that had written an Indian middle grade fantasy, so they couldn't take me on. And I remember reading that email and feeling so bad, like, timing was just not on my side. Realizing that, why couldn't you have two more? Like, it never occurred to me. And then one agent, I almost thank her for her honesty. I think when I received that email, it kind of helped in the healing process, where she was just like, your book is set, it has Indian characters, but it's set only in India for 1/3 of the book. For the rest of the book, it's in this other land that's not very Indian. So it's going to be hard for us to market this book as an Indian inspired fantasy. And I, at the time, realized how much market economics and themes and tropes sort of play into books and, book buying and acquiring. But anyway, so I reached a point where I realized that, Rhea was not going to be sold. That I wouldn't get an agent, not going to get a publisher, and that this was going to be one of those books that was going to stay in my drawer, shelved forever. I had my week of utter sobbing and feeling really bad. But then I came out of it. I came up with another plot idea. I researched that, I plotted it out, and a few days later, I got an email from Mango and Marigold Press, which is my publisher now and is an independent publisher that specializes in promoting stories from the South Asian diaspora. And I'd forgotten that I'd emailed them, because I had emailed them during when I was getting the rejections from the 7 R&Rs. I found them on Publishers Weekly. They had made it into the rights reports for the children's deals. And at the time, they were called Bharat babies, which Bharat is an Indian term for India, the name of the country. So I was like, oh, okay. And so I researched them, and they seemed really cool, and I'd sent out my manuscript to them. So anyway, this was around September 2019 when I got the email, and they said that they loved it. And I spoke with the editor, and my editor is Amy Moranville, and she's amazing. And she just got the story. We spoke about so many elements of the book, nothing about this needs to be less Indian, this needs to be more Indian. Like, Indian was, as much as I'm writing the story for South Asian kids to see themselves in books, I'm also writing it as a story for all kids who are interested in fantasy. This isn't just for South Asian kids. Just like when I read books with white characters, I wasn't just like, but that's their experience, that's not mine. Like, I related with them completely. So it's just a facet of their personality. It's not their whole entire, like, the only core of their identity. So she really got it, and I was really happy because our vision matched, and then we signed the deal in January 2020. So it's been a long ride. So yeah.
That's really inspirational.
Short answer.
So like you said, your forthcoming debut middle grade, Rhea and the Blood of the Nectar, releases June 15th, and Pine Reads was fortunate enough to receive an ARC of it, and we absolutely loved it, by the way. So would you mind briefly summarizing the story and characters for those who aren't yet familiar with it?
Yes, so I don't have a physical copy, but I have this. So Rhea and the Blood of the Nectar is a middle grade fantasy that follows Rhea Chaitri, who's a 12-year-old girl from Darjeeling, India, on a quest to find her missing twin brother. He goes missing on the night that they turn 12. She's had a big fight with him, and then he goes missing. her ama, her mother, is really distraught and she blames her. So Rhea decides to take matters into her own hands. She employs the help of her neighbor Leela, and together they go scouting for clues and figuring out what has happened to Rohan and where has he gone. Rohan and Rhea have a bit of a contentious relationship. They're siblings. They have a little bit of sibling rivalry. Rohan is outgoing. He's a popular kid. Rhea is more introverted. Their dad passed away when they were very little, and she is always on the hunt for answers about him. So she carries a lot of that sort of with her. And so anyway, when he goes missing, she just knows she needs to find him and that she can't lose him. So she and Leela embark on this quest. They unravel some clues and they land up portaling to this magical realm called Astranthia, where Rhea will learn dark secrets about her past. She will learn that she has magic. She will find out why Rohan has been kidnapped, and she will have to save him and Astranthia. And there's a ticking clock. So will she, won't she? You'll have to read to find out.
I love that. And Wendy and I think I can speak for Wendy as well to just say that we're just so happy that Rhea made it to shelves exactly how it is, and that it wasn't changed, because it is amazing. And we can't wait for other people to get the chance to enter this world and to meet Rhea. And that cover art is just gorgeous. Can we just say that? It is so pretty. I love it. I love it so much. So you kind of spoke about this when you're talking in the introduction about what inspired Rhea and those first two paragraphs. Mm-hmm. So besides, like, beyond that, like, what was the first character? Like, who came to you first as a character? Was it the world that kind of inspired you, the plot? Like, what was that first kernel of inspiration that really launched you into the story?
It was Rhea. She just came to me, but she came to me as a young kid. She was 8 or 9, I think, when I first wrote her. And the funny thing is, the first draft that was 70,000 words long, I wrote it with white characters. So Rhea was called Rose. Rohan was called Bryant. They lived in the English countryside, and it kind of followed the same story where, the brother gets kidnapped, but that was how I first wrote it. And it was only when my writing teacher sort of pointed out, this was still when I was back in Bombay. I should say I born and brought up in Mumbai, India, or Bombay. And I moved to the US now only a few years ago. But so my writing teacher back home was just like, why aren't you writing about Indian characters? Like, she was just, you could tell she was fed up because so many of her students have probably done the same thing. And it hadn't occurred to me. Like, I don't think it's wrong to write outside of your ethnicity or culture. You have to do your due diligence and your background research, and you have to do all of that. But it's not that you can't. It's just that I didn't think about it. I just automatically wrote these characters. So that's how Rhea sort of developed. She came to me kind of fully formed as this feisty, this curious girl. She was much younger, but when I then developed her and I made her Indian and I started thinking about her backstory and where she was from, I sort of got into, greater nuances into her character. I knew from the get-go that the minute I realized I needed to set this in India, I knew from the get-go I wanted to set it in Darjeeling. It's in the northeast part of the country. It's famous for its tea, but not very many people know what it looks like. And I know that, India comes with its own stereotypes of what it may look like. And, from the villages and snake charmers to it being very dirty, dusty, and, poverty ridden, all of which, not the snake charmers bit, but, there is certain truth to that. But there are also some gorgeous parts of the country that just are so underrated and nobody talks about. So I knew I wanted to set the story in this gorgeous, beautiful hill station that had the Himalayas at the back and these beautiful tea plantations. So first came Rhea, although like disguised as Rose, a white character, but then she became Rhea. And then it was Darjeeling. And then from then on, I knew that, because it's a portal fantasy, I love it when setting becomes almost a character in the story. It makes it more immersive and it's almost tangible. And so I kind of took that through with Astranthia. And when I was writing Astranthia, again, in my mind, a magical place is just, lush and just gorgeously beautiful. And, so it kind of added that element as well. And it was nice that Darjeeling sort of gave me that bouncing off point as well. So yeah, I think it started with, I knew they were twins from the beginning. I have a sister, I don't have a brother, but I wanted to explore a little bit of that relationship. And yeah, so it started with Rhea and then sort of went to Darjeeling and then snowballed into the rest.
Well, speaking of the setting, the world of Rhea, especially Astranthia, is expansive and magical, especially when it comes to different inhabitants. So for instance, readers encounter Peris, clumps, serpent lilies, bosons, and more. So how did you go about building this world? And what's one fun fact about this universe that readers don't get a chance to discover on page, but might be interested to know?
So, like I said, so, Astranthia came to me, I knew it was just going to be very lush and verdant. So, that's what I knew going in. And, I love a good-hearted fairy. So I had Flula. I knew that there would be some character like Flula. I also knew that, they're going into this magical land. They befriend Zarantha, who's a 12, 13-year-old boy who lives there. But I still wanted something more overtly magical. And I wanted a magical creature to be part of this group that goes looking for Rohan. And that's how I came up with Flula. And I use the word pari because that's the Indian term for fairy, and it's such a pretty sweet sounding word. So it was just a perfect fit. So that's how I came up with Flula. But the rest that you mentioned, like the clumps and the bosons, I sort of pantsed my way through. So there were, I don't think that they appear in the first couple of drafts at all. It was I think by draft 4, when I'd really figured out what the story was, is when I started introducing these characters, because I realized there are moments, because it's such a quest and plot driven story, that these kids are going to find Rohan, and it's all about that I didn't have that many magical things happening. And I'm like, they're in a magical land. There should be things happening. Like, even if it's not the core point or plot point of the book, it should be happening in the background. And so I introduced the clump. Also, in moments where I thought it would be fun to add a little bit of levity and, humor. I thought it would be cool when they go to Zarantha's house and they see a bosun there. And then there are, I don't want to give too much away, but then again, there were instances when I needed something big and massive to happen, and kind of happens in the lake of the Sea of Serpent Lilies, basically. There's this great big magical thing that happens. So, I added them in to suit the plot and to add more ambience to the plot. And in certain cases, like, I'll say it, like the Kefuldor, the flying beast, I knew that he would be there. I knew, or a creature like that kind of a beast would be there. I didn't know what it was until I got to that scene. And then I did my research and I decided this is kind of what I wanted to include. So yeah, I would say that with the magical creatures, I kind of pantsed my way through it. And one fact you said about Astranthia that readers may not know, I've been thinking about this and I'm still discovering the land. It's probably bad to say. And I'm not one of those authors who have like notes of, the whole backstory of the realm and of their characters. Like, I wish I did. I think that would make my life so much easier, but I don't. And I also don't want to give away too much because I'm drafting the sequel and I might say something now that could eventually turn out to be a spoiler. So I don't want to do that. But I think what they may not know is kind of what I alluded to before, is why I created Astranthia the way I did, in terms of why I didn't make it Indian inspired. It wasn't a conscious choice that I didn't want to make it Indian, but it was more sort of my influenced by my own upbringing in India, which is so heavily rooted, obviously, in Indian culture and tradition and, the usual food and festivals and all of that. But I was also a kid of the 90s. I grew up on Backstreet Boys, grew up on Nancy Drew, Sweet Valley High, all of the 90s sitcoms. And I have family in the US, which we would visit and then they would visit. So it was, and the internet had come out at the time. There was MSN Messenger, AOL when I was 12. So my formative years had a lot of influence from the West as well. And so it was a really East meets West kind of upbringing, like that sort of exposure. And that was my background. And so I created Astranthia as this East meets West utopia where you wouldn't be able to pin down exactly where it landed on a map. If you would, when you read the story, there are elements that are inspired from Indian culture and language and tradition, as well as from Celtic mythology. As Indians, we were colonized by the Brits. So we have a lot of influence from Britain as well. A lot of our, as Indian kids, we read a lot of British books. Like I grew up reading Enid Blyton books, which are again based in London, in England. And so I drew elements from there. So that's kind of where Astranthia came up from. It was really like my homage to sort of the exposure and the upbringing I had, which is why I created like that. I thought it would be just wonderful to have a place where people didn't see each other through the lens of color and race and nationality and religion. I mean, they have their own set of problems, I won't lie, but it's different from the ones that we have. And I thought, how wonderful would it be to have a land where, so many different kinds of people live together and live well together. And so that's where Astranthia came from, which I don't think most readers would know why I wrote it the way I did.
So switching gears just a little bit, you kind of alluded to this a little bit in like summarizing what Rhea is about, but one of the central themes of the story is family, which we always love to see. Coming from a big family myself and having siblings, I loved this story. So what was it like writing the relationship between Rhea and her brother? And what message do you want readers to come away with in regard to familial relationships?
So I really loved writing about Rhea and Rohan. I drew a lot from my own relationship with my sister. She's 4 years older than I am. And, as sisters, you definitely have a love-hate relationship, and especially in that period of time in your life when I think between 12 to 17, 18, especially. And, it's really one of those, she's my ride or die now. And I feel very lucky to have her in my life. So again, I wanted to explore that. You don't end up seeing a lot of sibling relationships in books either. So I thought that would be, a fun, interesting angle. And then I really love the idea of a sister going and saving a brother and not the other way around, or, boy saving a girl. So so I enjoyed writing that. I'm enjoying it more in the sequel because they're together now and they're not apart, because in the first book, obviously, we don't see them together that much. And when it comes to what I would want readers to take away is that, families are complicated. And I think, especially when you're an 11-year-old and you're a preteen and you're entering your teenage years, you become so hyper aware of the world around you. You start understanding sort of adult concepts and adult behaviors around you. You might, it's a time when you start to feel the injustices of a system, of family, of school pressures and stuff like that. You just have so much on you. And I guess I wanted to shed light to the readers and say that families are complicated, relationships can get complex, but, stick it out. Also, that sometimes you may not know the full picture. You may feel the injustice. You may feel your parents are being mean to you and unfair to you, and you're in this, not a great situation, but oftentimes there is a bigger picture that you may not have seen, and that as we see Rhea slowly come to terms with that and realize that there's a reason why her mother, she has a strained relationship with her mother, behaves a certain way. It doesn't mean that you have to instantly forgive that person or that behavior is, totally justifiable. No, but it does mean that it might give you a better understanding of that person and kind of like stick it out with family, because they can be your biggest strength and support in your life. And and love for family and wanting family is one of the most universal concepts in the world. You could come from anywhere, and you still feel that pull for family and love. And so that's kind of what I would want them to take away, that if things are tough, you're not alone. Everyone goes through their own version of a complicated family relationship, and also that it can and is a beautiful thing. So to hold on to it and pull through.
So what were your favorite moments in Rhea to write? And were there any parts that you found more difficult to write? And then do you have a favorite quote?
So the fun part, I had a lot of fun writing scenes between Rhea and Leela. Leela has become one of my most favorite characters to write about. And she just adds this lightness and funness, and she's just such a wonderful person. So, living in Rhea's head so much until like Leela came into the picture was just like such a wonderful sort of, breath of fresh air, really. So I love writing their relationship and exploring their friendship, or rather developing their friendship, which I also, I love reading about. One of my most favorite books of all time, especially as a kid, was Anne of Green Gables. And I enjoyed watching Anne and Diana's friendship evolve. So I enjoyed writing those parts. I love writing the villain. She was like, I feel like a delight to write. Like, you could like, I could put on my horns and be like, all right, let's do this. And it was fun to explore her backstory. I love reading stories where you get an insight into why a person is so evil or mean. She's also, my first villain. I made a very quintessentially evil queen villainy. Is my sort of nod to Disney. I am a diehard Disney fan, and I'm guessing it might come out through the book, even through Fluda. I feel like, there's a bit of Disney in there. But so I had a lot of fun writing the villain. In terms of the harder parts, I think scenes that, there were some scenes that came to me almost fully formed, like the Sea of Serpent Lilies chapter, the scene where they're in the lake and they have to battle these lilies. And I knew what was going to happen, and it was just so vivid in my mind, so that those were easier to write. Some scenes didn't come up like that. Like in a very late draft, I came up with Hex Hollow, which is this magical traveling market. And so coming up with that idea, was not very easy. I had so many different versions, and then I sort of landed up on that. And then I think the ones that are always a bit tedious, I think, to write are, I call them scene fillers or gap fillers, which are basically when, the characters are going from, say, destination A to B, and I need to take the reader along with them. I can't just be like, okay, now they're here and now they've landed there. I needed to show time going by. And so then I like stare at my screen, be like, okay, what could they possibly be talking about? Like, we've already established they have to do this great thing, but that great thing's going to happen, like 5 hours later. So, and they're walking to that place, for instance. So what do I say? And, it's important, again, in every scene that you give some new information. Either it sheds light on the plot, it sheds light on the scene, the setting, the social fabric of that place or something like that, or just into the, characters' personalities. That kind of leaves the net very wide. So coming up with those little conversations that are not, like, again, because it's a quest. So it's like, okay, we need to find Rohan. Where do you think we can find him? Oh, can you think of some? Those are easier because, you're going from one plot point to the other. But when it's just like, so we're just walking along. So what's up? Those are hard. So those were harder to write. Yeah.
I love that. Sometimes those can be my favorite scenes, though, kind of the calmer, like intermission almost scenes, like between like set pieces. They can be super, super fun. as a
But
reader.
I feel like well, I should speak for myself. It comes after like real trial and error, because I read aloud my chapters once they are, semi-decent. And the number of times I have like read aloud dialogue and just like slammed my head on my computer, like, what is this? This is so awful. So yeah. Yeah, those are, yeah.
In the finished product, it's amazing. So you shouldn't have anything to worry about there.
Thank you.
So on kind of a fun note, if you had to use 3 fictional characters to describe yourself, who would you pick?
Oh, so I ended up picking some pretty cool chicks. So I don't know if I'm really that cool, but like I love Anne of Green Gables. So Anne Shirley from Anne of Green Gables. I was kind of like her. She was the first character I read where I was like, I kind of feel seen. She was kind of rough around the edges. She loved her imagination was massive, and she used these big words, and I loved like collecting big words. I used to carry a little pocket dictionary in my bag, and I would write down all these words that I didn't understand when I would read books, and like write down their meanings. And I always had a big imagination, and so she's definitely one that I related to from the get-go. The other is Lyra Balakwa from His Dark Materials. I love her. Like, I wanted to name my daughter Lyra, and my husband's like, no, we're not. I said, no, please. I just love that she is. I feel like I have a bit of that, her curiosity, her, if I put my mind to something, I will do it. And I can go down like a rabbit hole of research and just, steadfast, sort of dogged determination to get something done. So I see myself in Lyra Balakwa. And I think I'm a little bit bossy and a bit, used to be a bit, more studious, like Hermione, I would say. When I feel like this is what needs to be done, it's like, I will corral the group and be like, okay, we need to do it this way. Like, this is, so I think a little bit of all those 3 amazing girls. So you can only imagine how amazing I am.
Those are all awesome characters to pick.
I also realized that I didn't answer one of your sub-questions in the last question about my favorite quotes from the book. And I said that because I wrote some down, so why not? My favorite quote as dialogue would be one that Rhea says to Zarantha, which is to friendship across worlds, which is so simple, but I just feel like that was so sweet. And one that sort of fully defines in one sentence the relationship between Rohan and Rhea is thinking about this, and she says, they might be twins, but they're nothing alike, which is really the 2 of them in a nutshell. And then I had this one sentence that I wrote from the very first draft and has stayed in the final book, which I have always been very proud of writing. I wrote that sentence and I said, I'm a writer, like, obviously. It's just such a beautiful sentence. And I don't know if people will agree or not, but I still think so. I just think it's a really pretty sentence. It just evokes a very pretty picture. And so, and I think it's in the first chapter of the book. And it goes like, the sun, oppressive and scorching, shone overhead, soaking the hills of Darjeeling in liquid gold. Like I could see the sun like just falling on the hilltops. So yeah, those are some of my favorite lines from the book.
I agree. I think that last one is beautiful. And you really can see it, like liquid gold on the hills. Yeah, I love that. So as everyone well knows, the last year has been tumultuous, to say the least. So do you have any book recommendations for young readers struggling through quarantine? And in other words, what stories have helped you through the bleaker moments of the pandemic?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Both these years, right? I mean, I thought 2021 was going to be totally different from 2020. And here we are almost, I mean, we've made progress, but we're still in, third waves in different countries and fourth waves in other countries and here as well. And so I would recommend the most recent books that I've read in 2021 that I really enjoyed are actually 3 debuts from 2021. One is The Last Place to Hang the Moon by Kate Alvis. I think it has already released yet. It is set in World War II, and it is just, it's like, the book feels like this warm hug, or like this warm blanket that you've put around yourself. You have a cup of hot cocoa and it's raining or snowing outside. Like that's the kind of feeling this book gives you. It's so wonderful. It's a story about 3 orphan siblings and they're looking to find a home. And it is one of the most sweetest, most heartfelt stories. So I highly recommend that. Another book is Clues to the Universe by Christina Lee. It's a story, again, it deals with grief and parental loss. And these are very hard and tough subjects. But Christina has done such a wonderful job in handling them. And she has explored that grief through friendship between the 2 main characters. And one is a budding scientist and one character is a budding artist. And it's just delightful. I absolutely love those books. And then I recently read Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. So for any of the fantasy fans out there who just need a light, fun, it's not a heavy fantasy, fast-paced, great characters. So I recommend that highly. And for myself, apart from these middle grade books, I read Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. And I love that book with all my heart. I cannot recommend it enough to people that enjoy reading adult books. These days, I just do a lot of middle grade panels. So I'm only recommending middle grade books. But oh my gosh, that is just a beautiful book. I mean, it was escapist for me. The writing is just incredible. I was immersed, lost, I melted away into those pages. And it's just such a beautiful story as well. It's amazing. So for if any adults watching who are looking for an adult book recommendation, that's one. And a series that I've just started to reread because I love it is my like hands down favorite series of all time. And I don't think that there will come another book or a series that will topple it from first position in my books. And it's the Neapolitan series by Elena Ferrante, starting by there are 4 books in it. It's a quartet. The first book is called My Brilliant Friend, and it just explores female friendship and the friendship between these 2 best friends, Elena and Lila, and it is spectacular to say the least. So those are my recommendations.
I'm always looking for good female friendship recommendations, so I'm definitely going to have to check that book out.
You have to. Again, I will say Elena Ferrante, and the most incredible thing about this author was that when she wrote these books, and it's translated works from Italian, she wrote this book under a pseudonym, and for the longest time, no one knew whether she was male or female. And it just baffled me that her books were doing so ridiculously well, and she didn't go like, oh, hello, hi, this is me. I feel like that's what I would have done. Like, wait, what? They're doing well. Like, and she had no interest. And so it's out of pure speculation, and people, started conducting their own little investigations. And I knew she was a female writer. Like the way she has written about female friendships, it could only come from a female. So I find the purest form of writer out there who just lets her work speak for herself, and she just does it purely for the art of writing. Which is not to say that the ones that hustle like me should not be read, but she's just incredible, and you will, I cannot recommend that book enough. So have fun.
That's an amazing story. Honestly, I feel like that's a rare story in publishing. So that's really amazing. Okay, so having now gone through the entire publishing process, if you could give any advice to the version of yourself who's writing the first draft of Rhea, or to just any aspiring authors out there, what would it be?
It would be to, especially with your first draft, is to write until you reach that last period. I did not do that. I mentioned earlier that it took me 10 years to write. One of the reasons was that I would write few chapters, and then when I would sit to write the next chapter, I would go back and read it, and then I would consistently edit and re-edit and re-edit, and I just made such slow progress that I would want aspiring writers to know that the first draft is meant to be terrible. But unless you have the whole thing down, you can't mold it and create it into the story that you really want to tell. And it will go through several different iterations before you land up with what you like and are happy and confident about. But if you don't finish the story, you're just never going to get that chance to do that. And I really suffered greatly because I did that. And also what ends up happening is that you get a really polished beginning and then a very rushed or a very, crude almost middle and then end of the book. And then what happens is inevitably you will chop out chunks from that beginning, and you've spent like months and months finessing it and editing it, and all that hard work is just going to go. And so right until that last period, I'm using that advice for my sequel, which is terrible at this point. But I know that I'm not going to go back. I'll only go back to, cross-reference some of the facts or some stuff that I wrote to make sure that there is continuity. But other than that, I will not edit and just go right till the end. So know that your first draft is meant to be terrible and finish it. And then go back and do whatever you need to do.
That's really good advice. And speaking of your sequel, what's next for you? Can you say anything about the next installment in the Chronicles of Astranthia?
Yeah, so it's a trilogy. And so I'm writing the second one, the second book. Sequels I find are really hard because it's this middle part of the book. It carries so much weight, but I'm very excited about it. I hope that the land feels more expansive and bigger because I'm writing it that way. What I'm really excited about is that I'm introducing a new character that is several shades of gray. And I had a lot of fun writing this character and exploring this character's backstory and growth, and I hope that the readers enjoy that as well. There's also just sort of, a peek into regular life in Astranthia, which you don't see much of in the first book because they're just, on a mission to find Rohan. So here we get a little bit of what their school life is in Astranthia, what their everyday life in the palace is like. And you will see a lot more of Rhea and Rohan's relationship and their group dynamics together, Rhea, Rohan, Leela, Zarantha, and Flula. And as of right now, there are a few more kids and new characters, but don't hold me to it because this is the first draft. So they may not make it, but I really hope they do. So yeah, and all of that is set, there's a backdrop of bigger, greater stakes and worries and possibly an impending war.
Well, I don't know about Wendy, but I'm very excited to meet this anonymous, morally gray character. And just to see what else you have in store in general, because we're both really excited for the next book in this series. Yeah, and we're just excited for people to get to read this first book too when it comes out. It comes to shelves in June. So again, thank you so much for talking with us. I think that's the end of our questions for you. Is there anything you'd like to share?
No, this was awesome. I had such a blast with both of you, and I'm so glad that you read the book, and thank you so much for having me. The book releases June 15th, and they're available to pre-order from anywhere that you'd like. They're there wherever books are sold. So, support a debut author in doing that, or request it at your libraries, or add it to your Goodreads and spread the word. But yeah, it's a fun middle grade. fantasy story for, I like to say 0 to 99.
Exactly.
8 to 99. Yeah. So it's not just for kids, but it's also for adults if you enjoy a good fantasy.
Yes, I agree. I think anybody, regardless of your age, can really connect with this book and just go on this amazing adventure with these characters. So anybody who's watching this right now, stop this video and go pre-order the book.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Well, again, just thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to do this. We had a blast too. It was great getting to talk with you and about this book and just writing in general. Wendy and I are constantly just looking for ways to get insight from people in the industry. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. You guys are amazing.